it's a pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, Tamarak Monjak, Senior Advisor for CBDC projects at the Bank of Thailand, who will be presenting on Project mBridge, Observing a Common Multi-CBDC Platform. Just before I hand it over to Tamarak, if we could have the next poll on the screen, please. Yeah, so the next poll is, do multi-currency CBDC systems represent the future of cross-border payments? So please do take a second to answer the poll, and we can see the results afterward. And with that, I will hand it over to Tamarak, please.
Thank you, Taylor. So good afternoon, and first I would like to thank OMFIF and DMI Digital Monitoring Institute for the kind invitation. It's an honor and privilege to be listening to the past 1.5 days to the insightful presentations and discussions. First, a disclaimer, the views expressed here are not those of the Bank of Thailand, and all the caveats apply. Oh, the fonts are a bit funny, but yeah. So the outline of the presentation. So today we'll just first look at some background on mBridge, and then we'll look at the platform itself, some observation on the platform, and the first pilot which was done in 2022, and how the platform actually addresses policy trilemma in international monetary economics. And then we'll look at the challenges ahead and conclude with some observations. So background on mBridge, in case many of you might not be familiar with, so it is a multi-CBDC platform for cross-border payment. So it's actually a multi-currency platform where central banks issue CBDCs onto the platform, and commercial banks can use the CBDCs for cross-border payments. And since 2021, it is run by BIS Innovation Hub in Hong Kong, together with 4 member central banks, so Hong Kong Monetary Authority, Bank of Thailand, People's Bank of China, and the Central Bank of the UAE. We have observers from around the world. I think yesterday, if you listen to Mr. Mu from PBC, we have 15 observing members, including those from the US, from Europe, and also from our friends in Asia. And the goal of mBridge is to explore, test, and develop a minimum viable product in order to be ready for production-ready solutions for cross-border payments. And to do this, we encompass not only technology, where we look at different technologies, we look at different configurations. We also look at how different laws and regulations could be complied by the services of the platform. We also put a lot of focus on business considerations. So it will be the private sector who actually propose the solution, the use cases for testing. And because we want this kind of platform to be sustainable business-wise. Background already, so now we look at the platform itself and the first pilot. I would like to make 3 observations about the platform. First, it's very modular, so different services are put into modules like payment, FX, capital management, AML CFT. All of these are in separate modules, and this helps both the developers and users. The developers, they can reconfigure and modify it to the requirements much more easily, and the services could be recomposed according to the requirements of the users. So it's very modular. The access to the platform itself is separated, and it could be, the first pilot, you can interact with it through web-based front end, or you can integrate it with API module as well. The platform put a lot of emphasis on compliance, especially, of course, AML CFT, but also on policy choices of different jurisdictions. And we'll touch on this more later. In terms of privacy, the platform gives a lot of focus and emphasis that information would be only on a need-to-know basis. So information like payee's details, currency they use, all of these are known only to relevant participants. Otherwise, they will all be encrypted and pseudo-anonymous. For the first pilot, we ran it for 6 weeks in September and October last year. There were 4 central banks and 5 commercial banks from each jurisdiction, so making a total of 20 commercial banks. And the use case which was picked as the first use case for the first pilot was international trade, and it was real value. So what does it mean? It means the transactions have real legal implications. I mean, they are actually real trade. The commercial banks execute the payment for their actual customers who have actually the needs for international trade. And if we look at the first pilot, what were the functionalities of the participants? Well, the central banks do the onboarding and offboarding of commercial banks of their own jurisdictions. The central banks do the issuance and redemption of CBDC for commercial banks to use. And I must emphasize that the central banks can only issue and redeem CBDC for commercial banks within their own jurisdictions. The central bank also set parameters which would satisfy their policy requirements. For example, transaction size, the limits on the CBDC holdings, or the currency that the commercial banks can use. And of course, the central bank can also monitor the data flows for supervisory purposes. Commercial banks, on the other hand, can request CBDC issuance and redemption from the central bank of their jurisdiction. They could use CBDCs for cross-border payments, and they can query past transactions and CBDC holdings on mBridge. There were 3 types of transactions that we tested. First is issuance and redemption between central bank and commercial banks within the jurisdiction. It could be manual or automated in terms of getting the CBDC. I mean, if you remember what Mr. Mu said yesterday, PBC, they have local CBDC network already, it's easy and wide, so they integrated for automated issuance and redemption. For other central banks in the project, we used RTGS to interface with the issuance of CBDC and redemption of CBDC. Commercial banks do CBDC push payments, and this probably be for import-export purposes. And commercial banks can also do dual currency, PVP, foreign exchange transactions. And what were the results? Well, we benchmarked it against traditional correspondent banking model, where, of course, we all know there are many hops that need to go around, and there are time differences. There are AML CFT that we have to check along the way. And the results show that compared to traditional correspondent banking, the time it takes was reduced from days to seconds, of course. The cost was reduced by about 50%. And additionally, the settlement was done in central bank money rather than commercial bank money. And also, we could use local currencies for cross-border payments, so we don't need to rely on third-party currency. That's the platform and the first pilot. Now we look at what we are all familiar with if we learn Macro 101, so policy trilemma. We cannot have independent monetary policy at the same time with fixed exchange rate or free capital flows. So we can only choose 2 out of 3. And in this case, it's interesting because different jurisdictions have different combinations of elements. So if you look at Hong Kong and China, both have fixed exchange rate, but China has capital control. Hong Kong Monetary Authority does not. Bank of Thailand, we have floating exchange rate. Our capital controls is only very minimal. And you look at the UAE, they have something else, fixed exchange rate, free capital flows. So if we need to satisfy all these policy preference, how do we do this? So in the platform, the way it was designed in the first pilot was that first for monetary sovereignty, only domestic participants can access CBDC from the central bank of their jurisdictions. So this would insulate money base from foreign demand. Yep. Also, we do not allow transactions to be done in foreign CBDC to prevent currency substitution. For capital flows consideration, we don't pay interest on CBDC. And for FX consideration, we do not allow a currency that is foreign to both counterparties of the transaction. So this is how we try to address policy trilemma. And we found also from the first pilot that we need to do, for the central bank to achieve the kind of policy objectives, we need to do real-time monitoring, which of course in the first pilot, it was already there. We might need some tools to do capital flow management. This is like probably an option for some central banks if they need to. But one of the most important things would be probably to provide liquidity. This is in line with previous discussions where we all discussed that when you have the need to make payments, especially in foreign currencies, then liquidity would be an issue. So challenges ahead. There are still many challenges. So first on technology. We all know that DLT can scale, but then there's still a trade-off between privacy and scalability. And the next phase, the project would look at a new consensus mechanism. And we also would have to decentralize the nodes. In the first pilot, it was like in the same place, although it's DLT, of course. On the business side, we only tested only one use case, so that was international trade. We probably need to look at other use cases, and there might be other requirements. Another issue that came out was FX pricing. In the first pilot, it was done outside the platform, but how could we do FX price discovery within the platform? That's still something we have to look. Legal and policy. Different countries have different definitions and different approaches to CBDC. Some probably have put into their laws already, or they're planning to. So this might have to be think in terms of cross-border. Because we are doing cross-border trade, cross-border payment, and a framework might be helpful. And various policies, AML, CFT, data privacy, all of this, we have to think of it in terms of across the jurisdictions. And for governance, this is an interesting case because it's a decentralized platform. Different jurisdictions have different needs. But then we are coming together, so there must be some governance to make the platform actually work and satisfy all the parties. So this would be something that we have to look at. And observations and conclusion. From my point of view, mBridge is very open, so it has a very open architecture. You can plug If you have domestic CBDC, you can plug it in already. If you don't have one, you can plug it. You can plug your RTGS into the platform. You can do it manually. If you want to interact with the platform manually, you can do that. If you want to automate the interaction with the platform, you can also do that. And the platform itself is very configurable. As I mentioned, different things are put into different modules, so you can satisfy your local requirements quite easily. My observation would be that the road towards an MVP is quite visible, but it's far, but still many hurdles to overcome. But yes, when we look at different projects, I think there are a lot to learn from other projects as well. So that would make it much easier in terms of learning from others. So thank you. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Just like the last session, please do write questions on the virtual platform. I'll take some questions from the virtual audience, and I'll open it up to the audience in the room in just a few minutes. So thank you very much for the presentation. My first question is on the mBridge ledger. So this is a new native blockchain which was developed specifically for Project mBridge. Which factors were considered when designing it, and how are these implemented?
Yes, so when we look at the specifications into the ledger, I think they reflect the guiding principles of the project. And there are 3 guiding principles which were stated like when we first make a report on the project. First is do no harm. So it says that issuance of CBDC by one jurisdiction should not disrupt monetary sovereignty of others, and it should not disrupt the ability of other central banks to fulfill their monetary and financial stability mandates. So that's kind of things that we've put emphasis on. The second guiding principle is that compliance it would be in focus. So AML, CFT, and other regulations like capital management or FX mechanism, all of this are put into the platform based on the guiding principle. And the last one was interoperability. We do not want it to be, as many said, walled garden. So it must be able to interoperate with existing systems as well as newer system if CBDCs come out.
And on that point, interoperability, can you speak a bit about how this works with non-CBDC systems?
Yes, it's quite direct actually. So if you have commercial bank on one side, you have central bank on the other, and let's say the commercial bank is on RTGS, then it could send instruction to the central bank that it wants CBDC to be issued onto the bridge, onto the mBridge platform. So the instruction would come and they would pay in. And if it's manual, then the central bank, of course, will look if the funds is already there in their RTGS account. If so, the central bank would just put money into the wallet on the mBridge platform. And if you want to automate it, then we don't have to do it manually. We don't have to look if the funds come in. It's automated.
Great, thanks. My next question is related to the policy trilemma, which you discussed, which includes real-time monitoring and surveillance, timely liquidity provision, and intervention for capital flow management. On these 3 factors, what should other central banks take away from this when thinking about developing multi-CBDC platforms? Excuse me.
Yeah, I think the ability to monitor all these transactions would be very important for not only AML, CFT, but also for the policy choices. That's one thing, monitoring. Ability to provide liquidity, that is something that we need to look at, and the project will look at it more closely in the next phase. Even traditional ways of doing things like central bank swap might be, one avenue, or you can go more high-tech, things that we can explore. Capital flow management, I think this is an optional, depends on the needs of the central bank. But I think all this kind of thing could be like put into smart contract and the blockchain layer and the application layer to can be designed to ensure that all these requirements are met.
Great, thanks. We have the poll results and they're related to my next question. But before we move to those, I just wanted to see if there are any questions from the audience. Yeah.
So just over your head, you've got Onyx and Ripple, and Swift are trying some of this stuff bank to bank. And there's a speaker from yesterday with an RTGS.global. Everyone's trying this. It's the Holy Grail. What's in it commercially for the commercial banks? That's specifically mBridge.
Commercially for the commercial banks? Yes, the commercial banks actually participate in the project, and it was them who proposed the use case, and they proposed, like, for the first pilot, they proposed 15 use cases. So I think they can see the way that they can help the customers and still have the businesses. And to add on this, I don't think that there will be, like, just only one system that at the end to serve this cross-border payments, because the needs for, say, small payments is one thing. Even for larger payments, I mean, if it's for international trade, that's one thing, but if it's for securities trading, that's probably another thing. So I think all kind of this would depends on the needs of the private sector.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, can we get the results of the poll, please, on the screen? So the question is, do multi-currency CBDC systems represent the future of cross-border payments? And the majority, or the most common answer is that they will be useful for some blocks, but not the majority of payment corridors. And this beats out, yes, they will become the dominant means of processing cross-border payments. And just a handful have said that they're unlikely to be used or that they're unsure. Any thoughts on this result?
Yes, I think they probably reflect the views, different views from which we stand. And I mean, we all look at it from different angles. But they might not be useful for some use case at all. Yeah, but they might be very useful for other use cases. So that's fine.
Great. We have another question from the audience virtually, and this was touched on in the PBOC discussion yesterday, but maybe you could just speak to whether you will adopt multi-currencies in cross-border payments or a standard currency in mBridge.
Well, according to the design, it's actually a multi-currency. So, and as I mentioned, guiding principles say do no harm, and we put a lot of emphasis on monetary sovereignty. We still believe in sovereignty somehow. So, yeah.
Great. Well, my last question, unless there's any other question. Oh, we have a question from the audience.
I might have missed this in the beginning, but I don't quite understand, like, what's the point of the blockchain part of it? Why isn't it just like some database or something? What does the blockchain do? Because, you know, the characteristics of the blockchain, public, immutable, it's not obvious to me that you, like, if somebody, a commercial bank in the UAE sends some money to the Bank of Thailand, or a commercial bank in Thailand, what's that got to do with the Bank of China? Why should they be able to see that on the blockchain? So I kind of missed at the beginning, like, I don't quite get what the point of the blockchain is. Could you just explain that bit? Yeah,
sure. I think some of the earlier sessions also discussed about this. So we are in actually, it's not exactly a trustless, but semi-trustless at least. I don't think that commercial bank in Thailand would totally trust a commercial bank in China and vice versa. So a blockchain probably help at least that the records are reconcilable, yeah, without any central party who they might not trust either. I think that's the rationale for using. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience.
In one of your graphs, there was correspondent banks that seem to be impacted by the model. What's the future for correspondent banking if a product like that is launched and deployed at scale?
Yeah, I think some might be impacted. There might be some impact, but first, I think Swift itself is already trying to improve on speed, improve on transparency. So, and they have extensive network. So I don't think that this will totally disrupt the whole model. But there are corridors where, okay, this kind of thing might be helpful. I mean, if you look at the poll. But then again, I think they all coexist, depends on the use cases. Yeah.
Great, we are very quickly running out of time, so I will just pose my last question for you, which is forward-looking. Moving beyond an MVP, you mentioned the configurability and open architecture of Project mBridge. In your view, is it more likely that mBridge will move to incorporate some of the observing jurisdictions to have more participants, or is it more likely that you'll have connectivity with other regional payment systems? What would be needed for that?
I can only say from what we have. So is that one of the goals, this is in the report, the first report, one of the goals is to expand jurisdiction to cover. It is, we think of it as a public good. It is being run by BIS Innovation Hub, which is thinks of all the projects as public good, right? And I think when we look at projects, other projects, they have elements that are good too. So in a way, we are all learning, and the platform itself is open. I mean, you can plug it in. In terms of regional payments, I don't think it's beyond. Yeah.
Great. Well, unless there are any other questions from the audience, this concludes our session, and we'll be moving to a refreshment break after this. But please join me in an round of applause for Tamara Kamanjak. Thank you.